Hello again, and welcome to the second episode of the Thran. Last episode, we basked in the dawn of the Thran Empire and their capital city, Halcyon. We learned of their artifice, the genius marriage of magic and technology embodied by the Power Stones, the foundation of their utopian empire. We learned that not all citizens were in agreement when applying traditional Thran designs so broadly, especially when it came to sickness, and particularly in the case of the rampant sickness condemning Thran citizens to becoming untouchables in the caves of the damned underneath the floating capital itself. This caused a divide between two prominent factions, the Artificers and the Eugenicists, the latter of which would eventually be brought to exile. Years later, the genius of Halcyon, the chief artificer Glacian, was stabbed in a riot on his Power Stone birthing mana ring, orchestrated by an untouchable from the depths of the Cave of the Damned, called Gix. The weapon used was fashioned from the precious Power Stones in ironic poetry. Glacian contracted and succumbed to the illness plaguing the Untouchables, and traditional Thran medicine did nothing to help him. It was here his wife, Rebecca, used her significant status as Halcyon's chief architect to request the return of the especially gifted eugenicist, Yawgmoth, from exile. So returning from his exile, Yawgmoth's first order of business was to visit his patient and form a diagnosis. He was quick to make Glacian and Rebecca aware of his strong aversion regarding the Power Stones, which was equally as quick to make Glacian bristle. This unease between them festered like the gouge in Glacian's stomach, where the Power Stone blade remained hilted. Yawgmoth surveyed the lesions and patches of infection riddling Glacian's body, taking samples from the sites as the man duelled with their egos. He instructed that no one, including Rebecca especially, was to touch Glacian under any circumstance. Gathering his own instruments and the samples he's collected, Yawgmoth took Rebecca's arm in his own and left the infirmary to explore the city with her, planning to examine the samples and form a diagnosis in short order. He returned with this diagnosis with an entitlement of phthisis, translated as progressive degeneration in the Thran tongue. The disease was exacerbated by magic, so the traditional Thran methods of cure had actually been making Glacian's condition a lot worse. This was given more credence as when the Power Stone chunk lodged in Glacian's stab wound was removed, his condition improved, if only somewhat. The microbes causing the phthisis were proving elusive to find, let alone eradicate, as Yawgmoth sought to do. He had to examine the source of the original infection, and this meant tracking down the man who had passed his infection onto Glacian in the first place, Gix. Thus Yawgmoth, against the concerns of those around him, descended into the Caves of the Damned. Proving himself more than capable of fending off the criminals and desperate untouchables dwelling in the Caves of the Damned, Yawgmoth ascended back up into Halcyon with Gix in tow. Glacian and Gix were from this point on to become, in a sense, compliant test subjects, and were for quite some time. During this time, Rebecca completed her Temple of Ascension, the architectural marvel in the lofty heights of Halcyon, and organised a grand opening ceremony to reassure the citizens of the Thran that no matter the dark dangers below, the light of the Thran would always dispel it. Glacian was meant to be standing beside her at the doors of the floating Imperial Temple, but was unable to due to the thesis, and Yawgmoth's painful searches for the cure. In his stead, Yawgmoth stood at the doors of the grandest structure to ever cast its light on Dominaria beside Rebecca, and the people cheered and cheered. Soon after the celebration of the temple, Yawgmoth was to trump that grand moment by finally discovering the cure of the phthisis, the Power Stones themselves. He explained to Rebecca, Glacian and Gix that the Power Stones emitted a kind of radiation, and in a large concentration of them, the radiation sickened the host and body, leading to the degeneration. The weaponized Power Stone, which had penetrated Glacian's interior, had allowed its radiation to seep deep within his being. Untouchables like Gix were also victim to the Power Stone poisoning, as the Caves of the Damned they existed was directly under Halcyon's radiating spewing mana rings. Rebecca was stunned, Gix was furious, and Glacian was resistant to the diagnosis. The genius of Halcyon called Yawgmoth insane and a liar for equating the Power Stones to such sickness. He threatened him with exile once more. To confirm his theory, in a fit of rage, Yawgmoth took a scalpel, slashed a surgical strike through Gix's clothes, revealing his chest and belly, and pressed a crimson-charged Power Stone to the man's flesh. Blood swelled, the skin cracked and turned brown as the infection surged. Rebecca lurched forward and grabbed Yawgmoth's arm, screaming for him to stop. He did, but not a single soul could deny Thysis was born from the Power Stones. Utterly outraged by what he had learned, Gix escaped to the Caves of the Damned, swearing vengeance for the Untouchables. Rebecca and Yawgmoth go to the Council of Elders within the capital to relay this dire news. The council is dubious, but through listening to the combined reasoning of the pair, grant Yawgmoth the resources and apprentices to study the disease. Halcyon's fate rested in the hands of what the council and elite of the Thran dubbed Mad Medicine and the man they had once called Insane. So, now it's up to Yawgmoth to discover a cure and heal the city from the sinister and silent disease. Removing Power Stones from Halcyon was out of the question entirely. They were the city's lifeblood, and the citizenry relied on them desperately. Privately, Yawgmoth revelled in this irony. The answer to the plague came while Yawgmoth was giving his apprentices a medical demonstration on Glacian's degenerating body. Zod, a traditional Thran healer with an open mind, idly mentioned the colour theory of magic. The Thran were the first human civilization to theorise the makeup of magic is split into 5 distinct colours. A theory we know is fact today, though at the time it was considered a wild idea. While mentioning this theory, Zod explains how the different colours of magic perform certain functions, and are able to be blocked by different things, in particular, the 5 great metals. At this revelation, a fierce light ignites in Yawgmoth's eyes. Metal is the answer. He orders his apprentices to quickly gather up as much metal as they can, including whatever coins are in their pockets, and to scrape the rust off the balconies surrounding the infirmary. While collecting this rust with a knife, Zod notices a distant chorus of screaming and yelling. Fires soar from buildings, and citizens begin to flee past Yawgmoth's medical infirmary. Gix and the Untouchables were extracting their revenge on the city with a mass riot eclipsing any riot orchestrated before. Blood stained the pristine streets. The bodies of the Halcyon Guard and citizens littered the avenues. Untouchables surged from the depths like rats escaping a flooding sewer. Yawgmoth armed his apprentices and ordered them to kill on sight, but not before capturing one of the Untouchables. The cure was in reach. It had to be achieved here and now. The gathered metal was melted down and transferred to an antidote bladder. Yawgmoth tipped it with a needle, kneeled beside the flailing Untouchable they had caught, and injected the mixture. In mere seconds, lesions receded from the body of their captive, and his skin flushed with health and life. While the cure brought hope to the citizens of Halcyon, the Untouchables brought nothing but death. Rebecca watched from her temple, she and her co-workers armed with whatever was to hand, including their tools, and waited for the Untouchables to reach them. Gix was amongst these Untouchables, to gather to assault the temple. He defeated the workers and cornered Rebecca, an insane grin on his lips. In that moment, a shadow was cast over them, a figure robed in the radiance of the temple's light as he hovered with one of Halcyon's flying artifacts. Yawgmoth came, promised Gix and his people that they would be remedied with the cure. To prove the remedy was genuine, he injected himself with it to pacify Gix's doubts. Yawgmoth was given a week to deliver the cure for the Untouchables, and until that time, they would withdraw from the city. He had once again saved Halcyon. Yawgmoth was met with adoration and earth-shaking applause as he addressed the citizenry and elders of the city and presented them with the antidote, the means to rend Thysis and the darkness from their lives. He was anointed a member of the council, standing proud as he delivered a speech of hope and a future bathed in the glorious light of the Thran. The people called his name again and again, Rebecca included. Yagmoth, the healer of Halcyon, they shouted over and over again. Yagmoth, the hero. Little could they know that in the near future, they will call Yagmoth by a very different name, the Ineffable. Little did they know, the infusion of metal in the healing serum had awoken a grand design Yagmoth had only just begun to roll over in his truly demented mind. Okay, so last episode, in the outro, I mentioned how the Thran and the Halcyon story arc were comprised of just 2 episodes, this one serving as the final one. I've had to make amends to that as I sat down and got reacquainted with just how big the entire lore is. So now, this is going to be episode 2 of 3. This is likely to become a theme in the future to split really gigantic lore up into kind of more episodic chunks, just to make things a lot easier to digest. But don't worry, I'll keep the bridge and connection between them quite clear with the intros and outros, and I'll let you know if I have to make amends again. So in the next episode, in the dusk of the Thran Age, we will see Yagmoth accomplish some truly terrifying feats with his growing political clout and ever-twisting genius, eventually culminating in the advent of the Phyrexians and the plane Phyrexia. We witness Rebecca battling with her swelling adoration and attraction to Yagmoth and her devotion to her husband, while her husband Glacian is visited by a planeswalker and is very soon drawn to Yagmoth's dramatic presence and charm, and in doing so, lays the bridge for his future designs. Until then, continue to release your untapped potential.